She's already got the plane ticket bought, and she is she's learning to speak Creole, and she's on her way to Haiti. So keep Rachel in prayer. I'm absolutely terrified. Hey, does Dan's driving story scare you guys just a little bit? I'm just wondering if it scares you like it scares me. But if you
way ahead of me.
Then the last announcement is June 1, our television ad campaign begins, and I'm real excited about that. So if you would, put that in your prayer list. Mark chapter 1. We're kind of running behind, so I'm going to preach fast if you guys will listen fast. This passage of Scripture, Mark chapter 1, verse 21. And following. They went to Capernaum, and when Sabbath came, Jesus went into the synagogue and began to teach, and the people were amazed at his teaching, because he taught them as one who had authority and not as the teachers of the law. And I just love that statement. Just then a man in their synagogue who was possessed by an evil spirit cried out, "What do you want with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." That would have been just an amazing event, wouldn't it? To have been in that room and listen to this guy confront Jesus. And who knows, what the tone was. But verse 25, Jesus says, "Be quiet. Come out of him." And the evil spirit shook the man violently, and he came out of him with a shriek. So the statement that Mark makes, that Jesus spoke with authority, he expands on that a little bit by saying that he wasn't just teaching doctrine with authority. He did everything that he did with authority, even to the extent that demons were obedient to him. I mean, that's the kind of authority that Jesus had. And so last week we talked about the idea of him speaking with authority and teaching. We talked about this idea of resonance, which has been something that we've talked about a lot through the years. The idea that when Jesus makes the statement that you are blessed when you are something, as opposed to being blessed when you do something, which is so difficult for some reason for Christians to get this one right, and yet we know it. I mean, we know it. We know it in our knower, somebody once said. I think I like that statement. That we know that one of the problems with Christianity is that we have a tendency to do things that aren't natural for us to do, as opposed to becoming something, and then the doing becomes natural. And so as long as we are doing and not becoming, the doing is just superficial. It doesn't take very much to scratch the surface and find out that what's underneath that isn't really Christian. So it seems so simple, and yet it doesn't dawn on us until Jesus says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit." And by the way, he doesn't say, "Blessed are they who pursue blessedness." Did you guys realize this? That you cannot get blessedness, this state of being that transcends circumstance, and it's about joy and peace. And you can't get that by pursuing that. So Jesus doesn't say, "Blessed are they who pursue blessedness." The only way you get blessedness is pursuing something else. Blessed are they who pursue righteousness, for instance. So those are the kinds of things that I think made people stop and say, "No, wait a minute. This guy's different." I can imagine the walk home from listening to Jesus talk And Jesus was one of thousands of rabbis who spoke on a regular basis and taught on a regular basis in the area of Palestine. And yet people were flocking to hear this guy. And they were because what he had to say was different. And yet it resonated with them. Jesus will say, in order to really experience life at its fullest, you have to get you out of the way. He will say, in order for you to really live, you have to die. And we have the tendency to kind of chafe under that, and the knee-jerk response is, boy, I mean, that's really not good news. And yet every one of us knows that the biggest problem I'll do it this way. I know for a fact that the biggest problem in John Dennis's life is not Sabrina Dennis. The biggest problem in John Dennis's life is not the Black Hills Church of Christ or some other religious group. The biggest problem in John Dennis's life is John Dennis. I know that. I mean, I can look that guy in the mirror and I can say, man, what a mess. And so Jesus comes into this thing and says, you've got to crucify you in order for this to work, in order for you to really live. And there's that knee-jerk response that says, ooh, I don't want to do that. But then, man, it resonates with something way down deep inside of me that says, you know what, I know that guy's right. I mean, I just know he is. And so that's what we're talking about. And we did a whole series, like a whole month and a half on resonance. And I'm not going to re-preach that series. But I love the fact that Mark begins his gospel with the stories about Jesus and his power and authority over everything. I mean, he's going to expand this authority thing to the point that he's authoritative over disease. The next section is all about Jesus healing people. I think I mentioned in Bible class, I'm just exhausted. And it probably is going to be very evident because I'm having a hard time even putting sentences together. And I was telling the guys, one of the reasons that I am so exhausted is the last night of this trip to D.C., I spent it in the hotel room with two other guys that snored in ways. They invented brand new ways to snore. And I just didn't get enough sleep. And so if you'll bear with me, I'm going to go home and then next Sunday I probably have a little bit more coherent approach to things. The idea that Jesus' authority, not just to resonate but to release, is huge. And I started working on this idea of that here's this guy who's possessed of a spirit, of a demonic force, and I started playing with that word possessed. I mean, we use that all the time. I mean, I even hear that kids say it from time to time, well, man, he was playing like somebody who was possessed, or, So I started asking the question, first of all, what's the big deal about the word possessed, and what does that actually mean? And when I asked that question, what does it mean to be possessed? And of course, everybody in here has seen the scary movies where people are possessed of demonic forces, and ultimately the word possessed doesn't have anything supernatural or spiritual associated with it. It means, for instance, I have a Chevy pickup, thank God, and it's one of my. I know. There's a couple of people in here that haven't, come to that point. But it's one of the few things that, I actually have a clear title to that Chevy pickup. It is one of my possessions. Okay? I don't think it's important. I think you can get to heaven without having a Chevy pickup. I just use the Chevy pickup as an illustration of the fact that I own it. So when we talk about somebody who is possessed by a spirit, we are talking about somebody who is what? Owned. That's right. He is the possession of an evil spirit. And the question is, well, what's the big deal? And the big deal is this, and this is one of those things that resonates with us. The big deal is you weren't designed to be owned by anything. And you know it. Down in the very depths of your being, anytime you see, on occasion I've had the privilege, I guess, of going to a zoo. And I see, for instance, this massive lion sitting in there, and it's really cool to be face to face with the king of the jungle. But there is a sadness to that event. And the sadness is what? You guys know it, just like I know it. He wasn't designed for the cage. That's just not what he was designed for. So when Jesus makes the statement, "You shall know the truth, and the truth will" what? "Set you free." And by the way, when Jesus spoke of freedom regularly, and in fact, John 8's a real good place to go, and I know that's not in the book of Mark, but it is one of the Gospels. And if you go to John 8, Jesus is talking about God's will, for you to be free, and the people that he was speaking to were offended by it. And they said, "We've never been slaves to anyone." They were slaves right then to the Romans, and they'd been slaves for the most part their entire existence, and they didn't even have the ability to recognize the fact. They'd been slaves for so long they didn't even know they were slaves. But when Jesus speaks of freedom, when he says, "You shall know the truth, and the truth will set you free," there is an implied idea that you aren't free if you don't know the truth. And there's also the implied, you were designed to be free. To the extent that Paul makes this statement in Galatians chapter 5, it is for freedom that Christ has set you free. Now you guys know that passage of Scripture because I quote it all the time. Most people think that Jesus wants to enslave you. The truth of the matter is that Jesus sets you free for a reason. And what is that reason? It's kind of one of those duh moments in Bible study. Jesus sets you free so you could be what? Free. He wants you free from sin. He wants you free from anything that owns you. He wants to turn you loose and watch you soar. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. Isn't that just an amazing thing? Dan touched on it this morning, and I kind of poked fun at Dan's deal this morning, but it was so simple and yet had such depth to it. And one of the things that I took away from it is driving 900 miles to do a 15-second ceremony. What in the world got into that guy? And here it is. My daughter going to Haiti scares me to death, but you know what? There's a thrill in that to me, because all I want for her is to see her soar. I want her And that's Dan's driving all the way across the state. The passion that we have for our kids. We don't have, I know kids have a hard time when they're young. I know Caleb doesn't get it yet. He thinks that, that it's kind of Dad's job to control me. But he's going to learn eventually that I don't have an interest in controlling him. I just want him to survive long enough for him to fly. I just want him to survive long enough for him to soar. You were not designed to be bound by anything. And you know it. And yet, man, we are so enslaved. As a culture, as individuals, isn't it amazing, the garden relationship? Genesis chapter 1, 2, and 3. The garden relationship begins with this idea. You're free to run the garden. You're free to eat of anything except for this one little tree over here. Leave that alone. But the rest of it, you're free to run. I mean, the garden relationship begins with unbelievable freedom. And man declared his independence from God so he could really be free. And he's been a slave ever since. Most of you by now know that I just got back from Washington, D.C. And I got to tell you, the country we live in, the design behind the country that we live in is splendid. It's not working like it should right now. But the design behind it is absolutely breathtaking. Our founding fathers wrote this in the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be what? What? Self-evident. What does that mean? Pardon? It's obvious. We hold these truths to be self-evident. Let me put it in terms that we've been using for the last couple of weeks. We hold these truths to resonate with the human soul. We were all created. We were all created. Isn't that an amazing statement? Our current administration is trying so hard to shut us down and to keep us quiet. And I'm here to tell you, this guy ain't quitting. I'm not going to be intimidated. This country, a long time before the liberals started saying that it was brought onto this continent by a group of godless individuals, a long time before that, these so-called godless individuals were producing documents like this that say, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men were created equal, and they were endowed by their Creator with certain rights that you can't take away from them. I do not have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, according to this document, because the government gives me that right. I have that right because God gave me that right. And we set up a government to protect those rights. That's what a government is set up to do. That's right there in that document. Guys, we weren't designed to be enslaved. We were designed by God to be free. And anytime you see a lion in a cage, or anytime you see a people enslaved by a totalitarianistic government, or anytime you see a person held captive for 10 years, or anytime, something down deep inside of you says, that is just not right. I got to tell you, I signed the Black Hills Church up, and you guys, if you haven't heard anything else I've said, you need to listen to this, because I'm telling you, the line's being drawn. So if you have a problem with this, you need to come talk to me. And you need to come talk to me real soon. Because last year, I preached a sermon that was a part of a project called the Pulpit Freedom Sunday Project. Some of you guys remember it. And basically, it works like this, and I've got to hurry, but basically it works like this. Back in 1964, when Lyndon Baines Johnson was running for re-election, and a group of nonprofit organizations were opposing him, he decided that he could shut them down by changing the IRS code for a 501c3 so that a 501c3 cannot speak out on political issues or endorse political candidates. Now, interestingly enough, before 1964, that wasn't on the books. Before 1964, churches regularly got involved in politics. After 1964, I think it was 1964, 1960s-ish. After that event, the IRS has been censoring what the church could do and what the church could say. Does that not seem a little bit bizarre to you? But what they did in 1964 was unconstitutional. And everybody knows it. So, Pulpit Freedom Sunday it's been growing for years, but basically it works like this. A sermon that on purpose breaks that law is preached, recorded, and then sent to the IRS saying, I dare you to prosecute me. Last year, I was not a registered Pulpit Freedom Sunday guy, but this year I registered the Black Hills Church of Christ as participating in the Pulpit Freedom Sunday. So, there is a huge team of attorneys that are hoping that the IRS comes after one of these preachers. And I happen to be one of those that goes right in there with them, because we are not going to win this by keeping our mouth shut. We were designed to be free. The country we live in was built on those principles. And it's time that God's people say so. So, in June, unless somebody comes to me and says, I don't want you to do that, in June, designed to coincide, by the way, with, can you believe this? That I actually got to see the Supreme Court while I was in D.C. I got to see the building. The guys and gals that reside in that big building are going to decide whether marriage is between a man and a woman. And who knows what they're going to do with that. But this particular Pulpit Freedom Sunday is designed to coincide with the release of that decision. So I'm asking you to be in prayer. I'm asking you to stand up. For God's sake, let the redeemed of the Lord say so. If there's anything that you're bound by and you need your brothers or sisters to help you with that, would you please don't leave. Come talk to somebody. And a good time to do that is while Jim is leading us in an invitation song.